Today we're talking all about TELedvisor roles, names, and practices. So what are the kind of different names, practices, confusion around our roles, and the types of things that we get up to and the relationships we form between academic and professional roles and teams within our institutions. That's what we're talking about today. So today we've got Dom McGrath who's joining us, and he is the team lead from the Learning Designers Higher Education Group at the Institution for Learning and Teaching Innovation at the University of Queensland. So, and then Colin Simpson, one of, well, you all know Colin, so he probably won't need an introduction, but I'll introduce him after Dom. But welcome, Dom. You're most welcome to take it away when you're ready.
All right, thank you. So, as you said, I'm a learning designer here at the University of Queensland. I added two photos, one to sort of give a sense of introducing myself and personalizing this. The one in the top left there was me when I started this role, and I had about a 3-year-old son who's now a teenager and refuses to be in photos with me. But it gives a sort of sense of timeline, at least for me, and hopefully for you too, that I've been around watching someone go from that sort of tiny toddler age through to being a teenager now. And the job that I have has changed dramatically over that period of time. I've moved up a couple of levels. I now supervise a group of people. I do vastly different work. I think I'm on my 8th different desk and my 9th supervisor. And that whole time I've been under this sort of label of learning designer. And this year I've been thinking a lot more about that role and how it's changed, and about the diversity of people across UQ, as well as my long service leave coming up, which I'm also excited about. So as part of that, I've been trying to think of, across this diversity, there's very little in some ways from the job I had when I first started that I actually do now, and trying to think, is there a core of what we do that gets called as a learning designer? Is there a sort of profession out there that's starting to emerge? Are there core things that you could ask or expect of every learning designer? And so that got me thinking more in this area, and I started thinking about, well, also, do I want us to keep being a learning designer for too much longer? And started having a look at some of the names and so on around that. So I had a look at the AFR list of the top paid professions as the best place to start, and the top 12 positions are all medical professionals, the Indianologists, and things that I can't pronounce after cardiologist. And so part of me was thinking, is there a place for a learningologist or to follow from that profession and learn something from it and try and raise the profile of specialty? And then I learned more about the way medical specialists approach their teaching, approach their learning and become professionals, and I went, I don't want to be anywhere near that. So I came back to this terminology that's been around a little bit. I think MIT's like this type of idea of a learning engineer. And last year at a local group, we've got a Southeast Queensland group of learning designers and so on that meet semi-regularly, but every 6 to 12 months. And we spent a bit of time talking, and we were visited by one of our linguists here, Ollie Sussex, and he spoke about the value of being called learning engineers, and that they're a very strong profession, and that they design things, and there's a really strong identity around that, and there's things that as learning designers we could take from engineers and possibly build into what we do and how we do our work, and set ourselves up as a profession. And I know from this that thinking more about that the idea of a bridge is what comes to my mind when you're thinking about engineers and what they build. And we know that people are willing to pay an awful lot to make sure a bridge works and is designed well. I'm not quite sure universities are willing to quite pay as much to make sure a course works before it's built and offered. But that's sort of where I was started, and that group talking last year is part of what got me into trying to do this project that I'll talk to you a bit more about soon. The last terminology that I wanted to throw out there was this idea of a para-academic, and this terminology is starting to grow at UQ. It's the terminology my director used the other day, and it really recognises that a lot of our work overlaps with traditional academic work. There's a lot of what I do that can be called, and occasionally is called, teaching or service or scholarship or research. And in many ways, I think that's pretty good. In other ways, I'm a bit concerned about the idea of a paraprofessional, that sort of definitions pushes us into a place where we're getting work delegated to people who are not licensed to practice, and that we're not a fully qualified professional and not a full academic, but we're sort of an aside. So I'm a little uncomfortable about this, and I do think there's a part of my work that is, I guess, given to me because in some ways I'm cheaper than an academic to do it, but I'm not so worried about that. So where I wanted to explain with this going was this picture of the internet, and saying that I think our role's more than sort of para-academic, that I think the internet's changed the way universities work very substantially, and that we have a new role that didn't exist before, and that history of learning design is coming from, first of all, as sort of matching that add-on of technology through to, substantially changing the way learning and teaching happens at university. And this role that we have, I think, isn't one of the traditional roles, but becomes far more a core part of what happens at university. All right, so that brings me back to that question of, well, here's all these different titles and things around them, but what do learning designers actually do? And so we started trying to solve this question by going, well, we can grab people's position descriptions, they're open, they're available, we can have a look. They're generally fairly interesting reading in a slightly twisted way. So we started collecting position descriptions last year, and collected position descriptions for most learning designer type roles advertised in the last, I think, 6 months of last year. And then we analysed those position descriptions and started trying to look at ways we could make sense of them and the things that get asked of learning designers to do. And I think one of the terms Christine used was superheroes, to try and describe the bizarre things that sometimes gets put in position descriptions and expected of people. And I agree with the comment that the PDs often have a gap between what's written there and what actually happens. And lots of people, again, the comment upstairs is someone who says they live in the any other duties part of their position description. But we went through and we tried to say, well, at least this shows what people think learning designers do or would like them to do. And we started trying to map out models. And we found this model, which is adapted from the Vitae Research and Development Framework, thinking that you need to bring knowledge and experiences, there's personal effectiveness that underlies what you do, there's this group of professional roles and skills, and more what we're asked to do is to engage, influence and impact. And so that's sort of where we got to when KDAD was lovely enough to give us some money and a bit of support. And we started this project about professionalisation and academic development, exploring this idea of the learning designer roles. So that's been led up by Christine, Dr. Christine Slade here, and we're also working with Dr. Ruth Greenaway up at the University of Sunshine Coast. And the first thing we've done is put together a survey, and we've sent out the survey in 2 different directions, slightly different versions. One to directors to find out what they want from learning designers. And again, there's interesting things coming through about the different sorts of names that learning designers get. And I should have said earlier that I use it in a way that to try and be inclusive. It's my favourite term, but they range from instructional designers to e-learning coordinators that I work with. And so we asked both of these groups of people a range of questions about learning designers and the expectations of them and what they actually do. And I have some very preliminary data to share with you in the last couple of minutes of this talk. All right. So the first one, and this was a little bit of a surprise, but not too much. Learning designers like to learn. So when we asked learning designers, what's the highest level of achievement you had? Most of us have some sort of postgraduate degree. What got more interesting was when we asked people what was that actually in, and the disciplines that people have backgrounds in and learning designs is incredibly diverse. And the one that is at the top, and you can't quite tell the difference with this one, is that science was the #1 qualification that we found in amongst the learning designers we surveyed. And as you can see there, we have about 93 people across Australia who've answered this question. And I think this diversity here really reflects the diversity we've seen elsewhere. All right. So then the last one that I want to show was where things get a little bit more interesting, is about these differences between what directors see as the role of learning designers and what learning designers describe as their roles. And there's some really pretty dramatic differences here. The size of, well, the number of answers, the differences in population, but that the director focus on curriculum development, and activities and assessment, experience being those things that are coming to the top. And surprisingly, technology really faded out from the director's level, but is still very strongly there in learning designers and what we do. And I think it's still a very, it's a critical part of teaching and learning and what we do across the university. And for me, also a point of being able to talk to people about their teaching and learning from a different direction and perspective. So I think that's about where I'm going to finish up at the moment. We haven't pulled apart all of the data we have. I think there's, well, I'm excited about getting a chance to dig in and actually pull apart what people are doing. I know we've got a huge amount of diversity in amongst responses and individual roles. We ask things about what type of things do you do or what was important for your background, and we know that we have complete opposites for different people in different areas. So pulling that apart and looking at how things are happening and where they're happening is something that I'm really looking forward to, and providing everyone with an update. So I get to pass over again, I think, to Kate and see if there's any questions.
Yes, thanks so much for that, Dom. That was great to hear what your current research is uncovering and some of the early findings. We're going to open it up to questions now, so I might just quickly, while other people are formulating their questions, if you do have any questions, feel free to start chatting them in the text chat, or if you feel it's a bit of a longer question and you wanted to use the mic, maybe raise your hand. But I'll just, while we're waiting, scroll through some of these other chats, questions or comments that have come up. I noticed that there was a little bit of a question around the term instructional design being used in the US, but maybe not so much here. So I guess, have you found anything around that, Dom?
I haven't dug in yet. I think we asked people about their title, but we've seen all sorts of different things. I haven't seen instructional designers much in Australia for a while. That was my first job, was a learning designer type role, was labelled instructional designer for just under a year. I don't know, I feel these things will go in waves and change, and people want to show they made a difference and will change the title.
I noticed Kahiwa had a great comment around the fact that her PD looks nothing like what she actually does in practice. I guess, did you have any, I know that in the survey that was passed around, which hopefully some of us did, there were some questions, I guess, about what your day-to-day practice looks like and some of those challenges. Have you found anything around, I guess, the way that, any further comments around the position description versus in practice, or any kind of other findings around challenges that might be worth sharing at this point?
I haven't dug into that too much. I know we've had a range of questions both internally and a couple of other institutions looking at people putting together PDs to recruit learning designers and trying to work out, well, what do we actually put in these to, and directors have really struggled with that. And I think that's one of the reasons Kate was happy to give us a bit of money, was that recognition that it's probably not happening as well as it could be in devising position descriptions, and both in the way of having position descriptions that represent people's work, but also position descriptions that are really attractive to recruit learning designers.
I have a quick question for you, Dom. This is Colin here.
Yep.
So, I mean, one of the things that we found when we were digging into this whole thing was that academic developers seem to exist in a different sort of domain in some ways to learning designers, but it was the academic developers that sort of are supporting the next phase of your project. So do they see a fair bit of crossover between the roles, or yeah, how did that come to fruition?
I think through our last restructure, we ended up in a point with very blurry lines for a little while. I think they're getting more well-defined now, but I think most people outside of the institute that I work in wouldn't know who was a learning designer versus who was an academic developer. And I think that's probably still true, but it's a little bit more defined now. And I think that was part of I guess academic developers being a part of this project as well. I think also there's a little bit more freedom on those two that have more of their work time put into some of the research side. I think there's, our lines are very, very blurred here at UQ at the moment. So I think that's part of what was pushing in, and also I think Sunshine Coast went through a phase of changing the way their roles were organised, and for them it's also at a critical point to try and look at what should they be doing, what's the future of this area for them.
And in relation to that as well, I have a quick question, Dom. This is Chia here. One of the things that we talked about is tensions and contradictions that come out of the various roles and boundary crossings that the learning designers need to do. Did you find out feedback or general consensus around tensions and contradictions that learning designers or people in the third space tend to talk about?
I haven't got too much yet. I think there's, some of the ones that I was looking at, I think there's, I haven't got very much from that research project yet. I've got a couple of stories around the edges. I've had comments from some of the directors around, the professional development that's appropriate for learning designers. And there was a comment there about maybe doing an associate fellowship for HEA would be appropriate, but no hire was very deliberately sort of written there. While in amongst some of the position descriptions and some of the things being requested of learning designers were things at the teaching levels and research levels that are very much way up on the list of the fellowships from the HEA. So I think there's some of that tension there. I think from what I've seen in the last couple of years at UQ, there's been a push to sort of say, here's the suggested boundaries, but those boundaries are broken, as soon as there's a need. I haven't seen a time where there's been a task that's needed to be done, and a learning designer has the ability to do it, but someone said, well, no, sure, it's a research teaching task or supporting task that's traditionally been academic, or that someone said, no, you can't do that, or that you shouldn't do that when there's the need, and that's the resource available.
Great. Thanks so much for that, Dom. I can see that there's a lot of comments happening in the chat, and some of these comments are probably leading nicely into Colin's talk, which I'm just, it looks like you're bringing it up, Colin. I was about to bring it up.
I have a plan.
Okay, so I'll let you drive that. So I know that you put some questions in there, Colin, around what I found out about instructional designers, but maybe I'll come to that at the end when we can have a more general discussion towards the end, because then we can unpack more of these things further in the context of a broader discussion across both talks. So it's probably a good chance to, if everybody could maybe just put a little smiley face or a clap or thumbs up or something, just to thank Dom for his presentation.